So with that introduction, I want to open it up to the floor first to see if there's anyone who has a burning question that they'd like to ask of any of our presenters. I'm sure that there's someone out there who has a question to ask. Yes. I think the mic's not quite working.
Yep, thanks, Buba. So I have a question with CI speakers. So I know this is really early stage, yeah? So still on the research and then pilot and application. So just want to get more elaborative information whether those initiatives will be applied in the whole because it was funded by the Walmart. So is there any intention to use in the whole Walmart or maybe in any kind of supply chains? So maybe I just want to curious about the scale of the applications, yeah, whether it maybe it's only still in the certain supply chains. So maybe that's, and another question maybe for the Ocean's Eyes is really interesting because you said about how to combine the environmental data into the consideration. So whether also is there any, again, yeah, as Buba says, it's not only about the fish stock, it's not about the environmental aspect, but how your visions on incorporating any social and also maybe economic aspect for the fisheries right, in your platform. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your question. Yeah, so our pilot is on tuna longliners, and so that's the fishery that we're targeting at the moment, in part because there are EM requirements for tuna longliners for some coastal states, and also because it's considered more of a labor risk fishery than, say, purse seiners. So the pilot will start with tuna longliners, but I think in terms of scale, it would still be around the tuna fisheries where this technology could be applicable, in part because that's where a lot of the labor risks are on, distant water tuna fishing vessels.
Thank you for your question. About that data combination. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the fishing data catch data is very difficult to collect. So actually, the fish data is provided by government. Now we are provided by government to mainly for resource management aspect. But we are now aim to collect from fishers to provide potential fishing grounds. So we provide potential fishing grounds. They can receive the merit. So we can get the data more. So we aim to that framework. Thank you.
We have another question from the audience? Derek in the back.
Thank you, presenters. And my question is to Javier from SATLink. You mentioned that SATLink have the scale and the government also provide their scale. And I saw in your presentation that you have both scales installed on the. So my question would be, is there any difference in the reading, and if there is, then what are the causes, and how do you go? I mean, how do you manage those variations, differences in the reading of these two scales? Thank you.
Thanks, Derek, for the question. Actually, we don't get the data from the Spanish government. The data that we are getting from our scale is integrated directly into the EM system, okay? And the cameras are not able to see what the screens are showing for the human observers on board the vessels. So we are reporting the data that we are getting, okay? And then they are doing the comparison on their side. We did a first part of the project without the scale, and then we installed the scale a few months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago. So we are still waiting to receive their feedback. That's why we cannot give a conclusion on that one, while we, for example, give an example on the comparison or the discrepancy with in the Tunago project that we have with Thai Union. We explain a little bit that difference. But in the Spanish, we don't have yet that comparison, and we hope we will get it in the next month or next couple of months when the European Union and the Spanish administration starts preparing the comparison between the scale that they have locally installed compared with the scale that we are providing to them.
I think that's a really good point, and it raises the issue of transparency and access to data. You know, I think that's one of the things, for those of us, a few of us in the room who were at a presentation last week in Pohnpei in Federated States of Micronesia, they put a slide up on the screen that indicated that there were vessels that were catching swordfish in the southern hemisphere and then traveling thousands of miles to the northern hemisphere to transship that fish. And this is the same country that insists that they have to do transshipment because it's impractical for them to land in port. Now, they passed probably a half dozen ports to get there to transfer that fish. So that begs the question of whether it truly is impractical or just preferable for them to transship that fish. Now, it really comes down to you know, having access to that information, and just for the purpose of being able to have an honest conversation. There may be simpler solutions than implementing some grand technological solution. Personally, I think it would be better to have those vessels, you know, transshipping either in port or landing, you know, to those ports where it can be processed and delivered. But that's a big policy question that has to be resolved before that can ever happen. We have another question in the back. Dan.
Thank you so much, Papa. And hi, everyone. My name is Dan from the Federated States of Micronesia. We're a country that we trial electronic monitoring on our longline fleet. So it's pretty interesting listening to the proposal for EM on looking at social responsibilities. And I just want to say that's a very big like dream you're looking at right there. You're talking about looking at potentially all areas of the vessel. I mean, from experience, we monitor just the operational areas. So you would be looking at basically the 360 view of the vessel, so to say. You're also talking about on-edge computing, AI features to pick up events and sending via satellite and 24/7 communication, sort of. So I was curious, are you providing your own EM system besides what's already on the boat, or do you want to incorporate your design into what's already there? And well, I guess the topic nobody wants to address, who's paying for this? Is it going to be the industry, the government, or somebody has to pay for it? Thank you.
Yeah, you're quite right. It is a massive project. It's a massive pilot. And I think how I would describe it is this is the starting point. In the way that EM for environmental, you know, started in the late 1990s, and it's taken a couple of decades really for it to scale. So this is not a 1 or 2 year, you know, pilot, and then afterwards we're going to have all of the answers. This is a sort of 10, 20 year, you know, project that we're at the starting point right now. So I'll just caveat that in terms of this is the starting point where we really don't know whether it's going to work, whether it's going to be helpful, but we need to start from somewhere. In terms of who we're partnering with, our implementer is Thai Union, so it's working with industry at the moment just to understand what's feasible. And then the scaling research that we'll be doing will be looking into other aspects of that. So it is an industry partnership. And they already have commitments to roll out EM on vessels that they source from. So it's tied in with their commitments. So that's how it's being funded, at least at this pilot phase. In terms of camera placement, it's a really good point because EM for environmental, right, the cameras are on deck, they're looking at fish. So part of the pilot is to review, is that good enough? Can we see what we need to see just with those cameras placed in those locations? Or do the angles need to change slightly? What we do know is they shouldn't be in private places. So we know where they shouldn't be, but what we need to research is where else could they be to be more helpful than, say, just the deck? Like, would it be helpful to also have a camera in the galley to see what the food or water access is like? So all of these are research components, but yeah, I'm very excited by it. It is a big project, it's a big challenge, but this is the starting point to look at whether this could even be possible. And I think the benefit of it being independent of government or industry, the fact that it's sort of a consortium of NGOs looking into this, is we don't have any skin in the game. So we can work with fishers to understand their perspectives on it, which is the most important thing, because fundamentally, if they are concerned about the technology being used in this way, if they have fears or their perspectives are that this is going to be harmful to us, we don't like it, then we can report on that because we don't have any skin in the game. So I think we're unique, and that's a benefit to the project.
The story that comes to mind for me is how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know, and it's going to be one of those initiatives that I think is going to take some time, and it's going to be one bite after another until you get to the raw end of the elephant. So I think it will take that long view to get these kind of human rights and labor rights issues addressed on board fishing vessels. I would say with respect to the incentive side of things, there was one instance where a fisheries observer from Papua New Guinea, there was an unfortunate incident where they went overboard, and it was the actual vessel cameras that were on board that allowed for the exculpatory evidence for that vessel, that it was clear that it was just an accident, the observer went overboard. And that particular vessel had 12 cameras operating continuously at various locations on board the vessel. Now, that was an initiative of that vessel company, but it does kind of speak to whether it's practicable. And in that case, it clearly was. The company saw the value of having those cameras on board, and it saved them a lot of hassle in the long run because they were able to show that, you know, there was no illegal activity that occurred. They were able to show that it was an unfortunate accident. And so I think thinking about it in those terms as far as what this type of visibility could provide as an incentive to companies to take on these type of technology initiatives, as Natalie points out, is really important, is as important as the technology itself. So, yes.
I'm going to
Claire.
feed off your thought bubble there, and a couple of conversations that have been around the rooms over the last day and a half are really about looking at, again, thinking about how we increase the uptake of the technology, therefore how do we get the benefit to industry? And this sort of a situation where you might have cameras that are there for fisheries management and somehow being able to compartmentalise, because of course we don't necessarily want that has to definitely go to the Fisheries Management Agency, that information. But the footage from other non-private locations could in fact be really useful if a company does have multiple, like a larger fleet, where you are relying on the captain to uphold, and the policies and all of this infrastructure might be there for the company, but there's no way for the company to kind of keep eyes on. So I'm just trying to, think about things and how do we, continue to encourage uptake, and there's got to be that sell back to industry. Like it's important. Like sometimes they're not all bad actors, right? We need to acknowledge they're not, and they're trying to do the right thing, but to think that the boats are a long way away. I think it was Javier, you said, they're whoop whoop. They're a long way away from necessarily where the boat actually is. So yeah, just thinking it's kind of interesting as well to think about, different countries when you've got foreign fleets coming into your zone. So that's a third party. And then there's a company. So we've got Thai Union. Let's keep with the example, right? And they're sourcing some from a different range of, oh my goodness, it gets complex really quickly. So trying to think about ensuring that each part of that supply chain actually gets benefit from the 12 cameras on board a potential vessel.
Yeah, I agree. And I think an important point from yesterday as well is someone talked about how, well, we already have these things in the agricultural context, which is all well and good for agriculture. In that case, the farms aren't constantly moving around the globe, and that's one of the significant challenges with fisheries is you've got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of vessels out there that are, delivering to hundreds of thousands of ports around the world, and being able to trace that fish from one point to the other is really challenging. So, do we have other questions from the audience? Yes, Greg.
Thank you. My question is for Natalie. Insurance companies, where do they fall within that? I apologize if it was in your slide deck and I missed it. Could you talk about the role of insurance?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that will be part of the applications and the sort of the third apply phase that we'll be getting into later in 2024. But I think they'll pay that will play into it as part of the scaling potential as well, because if they can show, or if there is evidence to support reducing risk and therefore reducing premiums and therefore reducing costs, that is a good thing. So we're not sure yet, like the full capability of what this data could be helpful for, but I think insurance is an important component. And at the end of the day, industry is there to try and save some costs. And I think this data set could be a rich one to try and do that when it's tied with, environmental reduction in risk and then social reduction in risk as well.
Yeah, and that's a really excellent point on insurance. And there was a case with TrigMat Tracking and Global Fishing Watch, I guess about a year ago now, their vessel viewer, where I think 8 insurance companies are now using that tool to identify risk levels in the investments that they make into, or the insurance offerings they give to certain companies. And they're actually making decisions like, we see you show up on some of these IUU vessel lists, and we're not going to insure your boats anymore. So I think that's a very powerful incentive. If you can't insure your boat and it goes down and you lose everything, that's a really significant incentive. Do we have other questions from the audience? Anyone? Bueller. Oh, wait, in the back. Derek's got another one.
Sorry to take up the mic again. Just speaking from experience here, we already install EM systems on some of our vessels with SATLink system, and I think already with our installations, I think we already covered most of the vessels. And these are small, really, some of these vessels are really small vessels, and pretty much there is no more blind spots for the crews. And in your presentation, Natalie, you mentioned privacy. And I remember the first time we had the consultations with the industry to install the cameras on board. That's one of the main thing that the industries were jumping up and down, and so our privacy will not be there, and all this stuff. And the comfort that we gave to the industry is that we will only install the cameras on the hauling area, the seating of the bike, and that was the comfort that they said. Okay, that's okay. At least we have some privacy in some of the blind spot on the boat. And now you present that you are going to for their safety and to provide evidence if there's any incident that happened on the boat. That means installing cameras on these blind spots as well. So how do you draw the line between providing more data to support any accident on the boat with the privacy that the crews on board usually jumping up and down, and for us who get the cameras installed on the boats? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and that is the exact question that this pilot project hopes to answer. I think with EM placement, it's all about trade-offs, and what we need to balance is what can we see with existing placement and therefore cost efficiency because it's already there, versus any modifications like additional cameras or changing cameras which would add costs. And then that's also a trade-off against impeding on personal privacy. So all of these considerations we'll need to take into account into our research, and I think it's an excellent point about what are the blind spots, and it's also going to vary depending on the vessel. So the pilot project where we're testing this and where we're looking at live data is just on tuna longliners, and the fleet is very small. So the sample size for this at this moment will be small, it will be contained, because it almost needs to be, right? We can't bite too much of the elephant off at once. But as it may expand, or if it's helpful and if it is deemed, supportive of workers and it is to expand, we would absolutely need to look at other vessel types, other camera placements, and find that balance and that trade-off between privacy. But I'm sorry I don't have a specific answer for you right now, but the pilot program will look into this.
So one of the things we have been seeing during the years with the small vessels is that even in fishing areas, it's privacy areas. We have had projects where the crew was taking showers on the holding area, and they were saying, hey, what's going on? Like, I don't want to be naked being recorded on camera. And then what we said is a procedure that they could select at what times they could cover the cameras to take a showers to give them some privacy as well for them, and say, okay, now this is your moment, you can take a shower on the deck, cameras will not be recording. So it's a matter, in some cases, to set up what are the moments that they could in some way have their privacy, and also defining what's the best position for the cameras at some point, depending on what you are looking for. In the case of the human conditions, it's a little bit like fishing. You need to set up the cameras in the positions where you can record what you are looking for. Otherwise, you will not be able to meet the requirements or to get the information that you are looking for.
Do we actually know, like from data, do we know where the majority of social issues kind of occur? Because I'm just thinking that there are certain places, bathrooms, etc. that you're not going to stick a camera, but does that just create a risk space that something then occurs there? So I guess, without going to that, do we have data that helps us understand where on the vessel the highest risks are for social issues? Like, is it the galley where a lot of bullying occurs? Is it on the back deck? Is it around a corner in the wheelhouse? A question.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one to pinpoint because it really depends on what issue you're talking about. Injuries are really common. Accidents and injuries are really common. And then if medical care isn't provided or adequate medical care isn't provided, that can often lead to even more severe injuries, and then sometimes the need for medical care on land. So really depends which one you're looking at, but a lot of cases just happen on deck because they're working, and they could, people fall all the time. Fish are very slippery, so there's a lot of trips, there's a lot of injuries. Abuse can happen anywhere, and I think something that needs to be taken into consideration is the limitations of what cameras can pick up, because something that may look like abuse to a third party may not be abuse, taken out of context. So that's another consideration when thinking about what types of issues. But I think for the most part, camera placement on deck should be sufficient. It goes back to that trade-offs, right, with privacy. You can't have cameras everywhere. You shouldn't have cameras everywhere. And part of what we're doing is, as we develop these labor indicators for what we can see, it's speaking to the crew about which ones are most important to them, what do they have most concerns about, because if it is things like PPE, not that I think it's going to be, but if they are concerned about PPE or medical care or injuries, then the deck will be sufficient. But if they're actually concerned about food and adequate water, then maybe the galley is an additional camera placement location. So we'll need to get the crew perspectives on that one to figure out the best locations.
Well, this is fantastic. We've had a really rich discussion, and I really appreciate the audience being engaged and offering up your insights and questions. So let's give a big round of applause for our panelists on the stage. And we can have you guys leave.